In Australian terms, like this was a major rail junction. Wodonga was a railway town.
In those early days, the railways made a major contribution to Wodonga, and I don't think it gets proper recognition. It was a really great place to work. I was only 16 when I come here, and I was getting the equivalent of $7 a week. And I was employed as a lad labourer, and I was referred to as the call boy. Nothing similar to a call girl, of course. My job was delivering notes to the enginemen, advising them of their next term of duty, knocking on the door and telling them and giving them their note. And sometimes they wanted to tell you that they weren't home. They didn't want to do that particular job, especially if they were being called in on short notice. You know, there might have been a derailment on the Cudgee line and somebody'd gone off sick and they wanted relief crews. And I decided I wanted to be an engineman, a locomotive engineman. It was probably 15 years before you'd reach the top grade special class driver, because you had to work together and you had to get on together, and by and large that's what you did. You all got on pretty well, and it was a really great place to work.
Born in Wodonga in 1931. My parents had a retail shoe store and shoe repair. There was a long sweeping curve for trains coming up approaching the Wodonga station. After the trains had got past that and was actually pulling into the station, I would leave home through the pedestrian gate, across the tracks, and there was a little kind of a step right at the end of the platform on the train and off to school for the week.
Just the employment in those early days. When I come to Wodonga in 53, there was a sign down the end of town there that said the population was 3,500. You know, with 300 odd people being employed, it's a major contribution to the town.
Very reliable customers. The farming community, with their good seasons and bad seasons, were much more variable than the constant income that the railway families received.
All the people around here used to get all their goods by rail. So you had trucks, a number of trucks would be coming here every day, the carriers, getting their goods to distribute around the district. Yeah, there was all these ancillary people that, you know, relied on the railways for their goods and services and their employment. Because
of the shoe store, we used to get quite a bit of stuff arriving by rail. They had two systems. The parcels could come passenger rail, in which case they were picked up here, or they could come goods rail, in which case they were picked up over there. Yeah, we had the line going up there and the big platforms there, and quite a number of people were employed in the goods sheds. Quite a number. There'd have to be 20 to 30 people, clerical staff and goods checkers and unloaders, and there used to be a big crane outside the shed here, or they used to operate that, a hand-driven crane and a massive big wheel on it and a handle. There was 3 tracks out here, the passenger track and the number 2 and number 3 track, especially on a Tuesday, and both those roads would be full of stock. And there'd be a couple of train loads of stocks, probably 30, 40, anything up to 50 vehicles. 2 trains of stock going to Melbourne. There'd be 2 or 3 trains that come down from Cudgee, and then you'd have the stockyards working flat out up there. They used to have a shunting engine just employed at the stockyards, servicing the trucks in and out. It was enormous, actually, enormous, the hive of activity in the town. The stockyards were on the western end of this area. It was opposite the cattle sale yards, which were where Target is now, and on the opposite side of the road were the pig and bobby calf sale yards.
But in our heyday with the standard gauge, because we were running the bulk of the work to Melbourne, we had 50 crews here, 100 inchman.
Also remember at one stage that's where Worth Circus arrived. They came by train, and I can remember the elephants coming off onto the platform. They set up their tents just down between here and where Aldi is now. In those days there was the threat of Japanese invasion, and looking back, probably because this was one of the main rail marshalling yards, the whole town was geared up to anticipated air raids. The school had slit trenches. There was a public air raid shelter on the corner of South Street and High Street.
When I first started here in 55, you used to have massive loads of wood, and it would stretch from whereabouts where we are now down there to the gate, and it'd probably go back 15 or 20 metres, just stacks and stacks of wood. Because on a Sunday you might have 10 or 12 steam engines that you had to light up. So you'd light them up with the wood first, and then once you got it going, then you'd put the coal on it and build it up. And then you had the coal stage up here, where they'd the coal out of the truck down into a grate, and then there was a conveyor belt to take it up into the hoppers. And then you'd put the steam engine underneath and pull a lever, and it'd fill the bunker up. And then you had big water tanks. There's all those things over here. And the fuel point, when they got the diesel, so you had the fuel point over here. Yeah, and over here, like you had the big shed where the steam engines were, and then you had the car sheds over there where they used to put all the car sheds, and that was a double track. That was a massive building, that. It was prior to the standard gauge. They had the Spirit of Progress in there. I
can remember as a child watching the Spirit of Progress go through, the initial run of the Spirit of Progress, and that was a beautiful train. It was a very stylish engine that had continuity through the passenger cars, and the last car was they called it the parlour car, and it had a curved rear window. It always had a bunch of flowers. It was a thing of beauty, which you can't say about today's trains.
People used to have their washing and that out, but for a time I lived over at the railway hostel, and just to give you an example of how dirty the smoke and the steam engines could be. In those days you used to just always wear white shirts. There was never any coloured shirts like this. And I used to do my iron the shirts, and I'd put them down and I'd forget on this other table, and I'd pick them up and there'd be all this sooty smoke all over them. It had gathered on the table. I had to be careful about with the windows, because there was grit associated with the steam. If you stuck your head out the window of a steam train, you had to be prepared to pick the grit out of your eyes. When those days with the steam engine, I must honestly say, I never used to hear people whinging about being blocked at the railway crossing. It was only in later years when the town got bigger and everybody was down on the railways, and get rid of your railways out of town, they're a hindrance instead of looking at it as an asset. And but in the early days, people would be there and you'd chupping through on the steam engine, there you go. And in those days you knew most people. Give you a bit of a hoy. Wodonga was small and everybody knew everything, more or less. One Sunday morning there was a lot of activity. From memory there were sirens, a lot of traffic about, which was very unusual for Wodonga on a Sunday morning. And the story emerged that a busload of army personnel had been, I think the engine had reversed into the bus on the crossing. It was early in the evening, the bus was coming into Albury. And I've also got a vague recollection of seeing a smashed up bus with a lot of blood residue and
fragments of goodness knows what. There was a kind of a background, always a background conversation about shunters being injured or killed in the process of shunting, because here there was a whole multitude of tracks, and there was a lot of shunting, reassembling of trains.
I was involved, unfortunately, in a number of them, not as a driver, but when I was the fireman, but the experience was pretty well the same. But the problem we used to have was a lot of us found that a near miss used to create just as much trauma as if you hit somebody and kill them. And it was quite odd. It affected people differently. Some people coped with it quite well, and I consider myself to be one of those, because I watched an engine run over a man, chop his legs off. I watched another man, looked him in the eye just before we hit him, and hit vehicles with the engine, and people have been killed. And that destroyed a lot of people. I coped with it okay, but I did have a few shaky days after it, of course, and you're always mindful of it, but you always endeavoured not to let it get on top of you, because if you did, well, you didn't have a job. In later years, when they got the diesels, the job changed a hell of a lot, and things changed with the passage of time, and there wasn't as much reliance on each other as there used to be. But it was still, you still used to watch out for each other, but I did find that there just wasn't that closeness that there was in the days of the steam. And I must admit, I still get a little bit emotional when I come down here and I look around here, and the old mind starts to swing back to what things were and the great times that we had, and all the great fellas that I work with are no longer here. And that's one thing that I do miss. The B class be coming in on the night pass, and be down there in the holler, and the dynamic brake would be in, and it'd be screaming. You could hear it all over town, and they used to howl, and it was a great sound. Such a brilliant place, Wodonga. It really is. She's a great town. I've always looked on this place as God's country.